Good evening, lovers of history and the world's strange turning points. Come a little closer. Tonight we're following a winter figure so familiar we almost stop seeing him. Yet he is, in a very modern way, an invention. Feel the season first. A December street after dark, the crisp bite in your nostrils, the faint squeak of boots on packed snow, window lights spilling onto sidewalks like warm honey. Somewhere a child presses a mitten to a cold pane, watching strangers hurry by with parcels. It looks eternal, but the Santa we recognize, the red coat, the list, the North Pole address, would have puzzled most people who ever whispered the name Saint Nicholas. Nicholas was real enough to leave footprints in legend. A bishop in the eastern Mediterranean, in a port town where nets dried salty and the wind carried ship creak and gull cry. People remembered him not for spectacle, but for quiet giving, help that arrived before shame could harden. And here is the secret engine of our story. Every era borrows the past to solve its own winter problems. A priest might worry, privately, if our rituals lose their meaning, what holds the community together? A merchant might admit, if the season can stir generous hearts, it can also keep my shop alive until spring. A parent, counting coins at a kitchen table, might think, I want my children to feel wonder, but I'm afraid of disappointing them. So Santa is not a single man on a single night. He is a meeting point. Faith and folklore, discipline and delight, family tenderness and public celebration. And when that meeting point becomes widely shared, repeated in print, in pictures, in store windows, it starts to feel ancient, even when it's newly assembled. By the end of our journey, you'll see how a saint's hush became a nation's holiday voice, and how that voice learned to travel faster than any sleigh. For now, keep your coat on. We're stepping into a harbor city where languages collide, and where an old saint is about to learn a new name. The docks of 17th century New Amsterdam smell of tar, wet hemp rope, and fish that refuses to freeze. Men shout over the slap of water against pilings, even at night. Barrels roll, crates thump, and a thin winter sun turns every breath into a pale cloud. This is a small Dutch outpost, stubbornly tidy in its paperwork and untidy in its weather. Back across the Atlantic, families knew a visitor who arrived not on December 25th, but on the eve of December 6th. Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas, came with a bishop's dignity, a tall hat, and the promise that small gifts could carry big comfort. Children left out shoes. Adults left out stories. It was less a party than a reassurance. Someone notices, someone provides. In the colony, that reassurance becomes practical. A mother, hearing English ships rumored offshore, feels her stomach tighten. If our children forget our customs, will they forget us? A trader, quill behind his ear, has a different worry. If winter empties the streets, my debts will swallow me. For both, a feast that gathers families indoors and brings a little generosity helps a fragile community hold its shape. Then the English take the settlement and rename it New York. Courtrooms, signs, and ledgers change language. Traditions don't vanish. They slip into kitchens, into back rooms, into the private calendar of families who still pronounce names the old way. The saint's title blurs at the edges as children repeat it with new accents. And that blur matters, because once a custom is partly misunderstood, it becomes available for remixing. A saint can become a seasonal spirit. A church figure can become a household guest. In a growing city of immigrants and arguments, the question quietly forms, what winter ritual could belong to everyone, not just one tongue or one church? Keep listening to the dockside noise. The old saint has survived the ocean. Now he must survive a changing city, and the next transformation will come not from a bishop, but from ink. Now travel north, where winter is not a mood but a ruler. In a New England town, snow is packed hard by boots and wagon wheels until it shines faintly blue. For many early Protestants, Christmas carried a dangerous perfume. Old misrule, noisy street revels, drinking, masks, the temporary turning upside down of social ranks. In parts of colonial America, celebrating Christmas was treated with suspicion and at times even fined. The fear was not joy itself, but what joy could loosen. A magistrate, pen scratching beside a frosted window, thinks, if we allow one night of chaos, we invite a season of it. Yet desire is stubborn. In a kitchen after dark, someone warms cider on the stove, and the sweet steam curls into the rafters like a secret. A servant girl, tired of being watched all year, feels a tiny rebellion rise. Can't we have one harmless evening that belongs to us? A minister, equally human, wrestles with his own tension. If I soften the rule, will I betray my flock or save their spirits? This tug-of-war quietly changes the architecture of celebration. When public revel becomes risky, winter meaning migrates indoors. The home turns into the stage, the hearth, the table, the child's bed. And in that intimate space, a gift-bringer makes more sense than a street parade. A visitor who arrives quietly can deliver wonder without waking the constable. So even restraint contributes to Santa's future. It teaches the season to be domestic, repeatable, family-centered. It teaches stories to fit inside a room. But the rooms are getting crowded. The answer will arrive on paper. Cities swell, apprentices and laborers grow restless, and winter streets again begin to churn with rowdy energy. The next question will be urgent and civic. How do you keep Christmas warm without letting it turn wild? Early 19th century New York is a city of sharp corners. Horse hooves strike frozen ruts. Smoke from coal and kitchen fires hangs low, smelling of soot and onions. In the evenings, taverns glow like small furnaces, and groups of young men, bored, underpaid, half-drunk on bravado, roam the streets demanding Christmas treats. Sometimes it is joking. Sometimes it is broken glass. The wealthy lock doors. The poor feel the insult of those locks. Civic leaders feel something colder than winter, the fear that a holiday can become a yearly rehearsal for disorder. A city official, rubbing tired eyes over a ledger, thinks, if the streets riot, the whole idea of community cracks. Reformers begin to wonder if Christmas can be redirected, pulled away from street pressure and into family gentleness. This is where writers enter, not as saviors, but as engineers of mood. Washington Irving, with his playful Knickerbocker nostalgia, imagines an older New York that feels calmer and more neighborly than the present. His private conflict is easy to miss. He longs for belonging in a place that is changing too fast. If I can give this city a softer origin story, he thinks, maybe we'll treat each other less like strangers. In Irving's pages, St. Nicholas drifts over rooftops in a whimsical way, more folk figure than church authority. It's a subtle shift. The saint becomes civic heritage, something a mixed city might share without arguing theology. In parlors lit by oil lamps, readers laugh, then grow strangely comforted. A father reading aloud feels it. If my children learn a gentler Christmas, perhaps they'll grow into gentler citizens. Ink, in other words, begins to do public work. It offers a ritual that can calm a city, not by force, but by story. Yet Irving's Nicholas is still hazy, more idea than fully formed character. For a myth to spread, it needs a scene you can replay in any house, any year. And somewhere, in the quiet of a winter evening, that scene is about to be written in rhyme. It's the kind of night that makes a home feel like a small ship at sea. The wind tests the windows. The fire settles into a steady crackle. Stockings, simple cloth tubes, hang with a hopeful emptiness. And in the soft circle of lamplight, a poem begins to travel from mouth to ear. In 1823, A Visit from St. Nicholas appears in print. You know its rhythm even if you can't place where you learned it. In a few neat stanzas, it does something powerful and gentle. It moves the gift-bringer to Christmas Eve, gives him a sleigh, gives him 8 reindeer with names that stick, and gives him a temperament that is all warmth, quick, merry, careful not to wake the household. This isn't truth replacing truth. It's a culture choosing a version that fits. The poem offers parents a ritual they can manage. One night, one visitor, one suspenseful wait. A parent hears the line about a right jolly old elf and thinks, with relief, good, this is delight, not menace. Yet the author often associated with it, Clement Clark Moore, reportedly carried his own unease. Will serious people think I've made myself ridiculous? Respectability and tenderness pull in opposite directions. In the print shop, you can smell hot metal type and damp paper. A press groans, then releases pages in stacks, the way a bakery releases loaves. The poem slips into newspapers, into scrapbooks, into memory. Children memorize it like a charm. Adults repeat it, then claim they always knew it. A child, half asleep on a rug, watches shadows dance and thinks, "Please, let the world be kind tomorrow." And notice what else the poem does. It turns a saint into a visitor you can almost hear breathing. He isn't preaching. He isn't judging harshly. He is busy. He laughs. He leaves. That simplicity makes him portable. But a portable myth still needs a recognizable face. Right now, Santa is mostly sound and motion, hoofbeats imagined on a roof. Soon, artists will begin fixing his features in ink and paint, until millions feel they've seen him with their own eyes. By the 1840s, the season is changing shape. Walk past a city shop and you'll catch the sharp green scent of pine brought indoors, the waxy sweetness of candles, the faint metallic sparkle of cheap ornaments. German immigrants popularized the Christmas tree, an indoor winter that can be tended. Across the Atlantic, Dickens helps make Christmas feel like a moral temperature, a time for softness, reconciliation, the warming of a hard year. Industrial life is tightening its grip. Factories demand punctuality. Railroads synchronize clocks. Newspapers stitch strangers into a shared conversation. People feel time speeding up, and they want a ritual that slows the heart. A minister, tired of scolding, thinks, "If I can guide this hunger for celebration, perhaps it won't spill into cruelty." A shopkeeper, wiping fog from a display window, admits, "If families linger here in December, I can keep my workers through January." Names mingle. Some households say Kris Kringle. Some invoke Father Christmas. In many places, St. Nicholas traditions keep echoing under new words. But the sleigh and reindeer scene keeps winning because it works almost anywhere. A farmhouse, a boarding house, even a crowded tenement where the chimney might be only a metaphor. The ritual doesn't require wealth. It requires anticipation. And anticipation, once shared, becomes a kind of social glue. Children learn to wait. Parents learn a new tool of gentle guidance. "Be good," a mother says, and behind the phrase is not a threat of punishment, but a hope for harmony. Still, her inner conflict is real. Am I teaching kindness, or merely training compliance? America, meanwhile, is approaching a breaking point. Arguments about power, labor, and human bondage are hardening into lines that will soon be defended with rifles. In such times, even a holiday story can be asked to carry weight far beyond its size. When the guns finally speak, Santa will appear in a place you might not expect, not by the fireplace, but in a newspaper read by men in camps. And the image will feel like a letter from home. December in a wartime camp has its own music, canvas snapping, boots scraping frost, distant artillery like a door slammed far away. Coffee boils in battered tins at dawn, smelling scorched and hopeful. A soldier sits on a log with a newspaper spread over his knees, hands trembling more from cold than fear. At least that's what he tells himself. In the 1860s, illustrated papers like Harper's Weekly carry Santa into a new role. Thomas Nast, an immigrant artist with fierce loyalties, draws the gift-bringer visiting Union troops. In one image, Santa hands out presents and cheer, wearing clothing that quietly echoes national symbols. Nast's conflict is not about selling a fantasy. It's about holding a fraying idea together. If this country tears apart, he thinks, what happens to the promise that ordinary people can build a common home? For the men who read those pages, the drawing is a small mercy. It doesn't stop bullets. It doesn't shorten the war. But it offers a momentary, brief bridge back to kitchens and children. A soldier looks at Santa's round face and feels a sting behind the eyes. I hate that I need this, he thinks, but I do. Nast keeps drawing Santa year after year, and you can watch the character solidify. The beard grows fuller. The belly becomes friendly. The implied workshop appears. The North Pole begins to make sense as a safe, distant address for the imagination. Far from politics, far from grief. Repetition does the work that tradition once did. This is how icons form in a modern nation, through shared images arriving on schedule. The holiday becomes not only private ritual, but public reassurance. And once Santa is public, children start treating him like an institution. They write letters. They ask questions. They demand details. And before long, adults, ever practical, We'll build places where those questions can be asked face-to-face, under bright lights, with a real chair and a real beard. The next stop is the department store. Step into an American department store in the 1880s, and the first thing you notice is heat. Radiators hiss, wet coats steam, perfume, pine, and the sugar dust smell of candy counters mingle in the air. Above, balconies stack like ship decks. Below, crowds flow in slow, determined currents toward windows staged like little theaters. This is the age when Santa takes a job, without ever signing a contract. Retailers discover that a recognizable holiday visitor can gather families the way a church bell gathers a parish. A store owner, watching rivals open across town, feels the familiar pressure of modern competition. If I don't become the place where Christmas happens, I won't survive. So he hires a man in velvet and cotton beard, builds a chair, and turns a myth into an appointment. Children approach with the gravity of diplomats. They climb onto a lap that smells faintly of wool and pipe tobacco. They whisper wishes. Parents hover behind them, half smiling, half calculating, caught between tenderness and budget. A mother's inner conflict is quiet but sharp. I want them to feel magic, she thinks. Yet I'm afraid the season is becoming a test I can't always pass. Meanwhile, writers and illustrators keep adding practical details that make Santa easier to understand and therefore easier to share. He gets a workshop. He gets helpers. He gets a naughty or nice idea that, in many homes, is used less as a threat than as a gentle nudge toward kindness. It's a moral language translated into bedtime terms. And as mail routes thicken across the continent, railways, sorting offices, rural delivery, children begin to do what modern citizens do with big institutions. They write letters. Thousands become millions. Some ask for toys. Some ask for boots. Some ask for a father to come home safe. A postmaster reads one by a stove and thinks, what do I do with a child's hope when it lands on my desk? That question will pull Santa into bureaucracy, charity, and the official machinery of a growing nation. And once Santa has an address, the North Pole will start receiving mail, whether it asked for it or not. A small-town post office in the early 1900s is a room built for patience. The floorboards creak. The stove ticks as it cools and heats. Ink smells sharp, and leather mailbags carry the dusty scent of long roads. Outside, horses stamp in the snow. Inside, the nation arrives in envelopes. Every December, a particular kind of letter appears, addressed simply to Santa Claus, sometimes with no street, no city, only faith in the system. The handwriting is careful or wobbly, the pencil marks pressed hard with urgency. A clerk opens one by mistake, reads a few lines, and feels an unexpected squeeze in the chest. Dear Santa, my mama is sick. Can you help? His inner conflict is immediate. The rules say misdirected mail is a problem, he thinks. But my conscience says this is a child. Across America, postmasters improvise. Some return letters with gentle notes. Some answer them themselves, using official stationery like stage props for kindness. Civic groups and newspapers begin organizing Santa efforts, pairing letters with donors, turning private wishes into public generosity. It is not perfect. It is not always fair. But it becomes a way for communities to practice being communities. At the same time, Santa's image keeps traveling through magazines and parades. He is painted on storefront glass. He rides down main streets on floats with brass bands and hoarse breath rising like smoke. In many towns, the parade is the moment when the season becomes real, not because it is ancient, but because everyone sees it together. Still, Santa's appearance is not yet standardized. In one illustration, he wears brown. In another, he looks thin and stern. A nation that shares images wants consistency the way it wants a stable currency. And modern media, especially advertising, specializes in consistency. Soon an artist will be asked, very simply, to make Santa look unmistakably friendly, unmistakably familiar, year after year. In a quiet studio that smells of paint and paper, the face we now remember will finally settle into place. The early 1930s are lean years. In many homes, the winter pantry echoes. Coal is rationed by money, not by law. Yet in an advertising studio, the lamps are bright and steady, casting clean light over a table that smells of turpentine, pencil shavings, and fresh paper. Even in hard times, images must be made. A company wants a holiday picture that feels trustworthy, warm enough to belong in a family album. The artist, Haddon Sundblom, faces a familiar creative tension. If I paint him too grand, he becomes distant, he thinks. If I paint him too childish, adults won't believe. He reaches back to the beloved 1823 poem and leans into its human detail. Rosy cheeks, twinkling eyes, a belly that suggests comfort rather than excess. Sundblom's Santa is tall and approachable, built like a friendly uncle who knows how to carry a sleeping child without waking them. The suit becomes decisively red with white trim. The smile is easy, not sly. And because the image is repeated, season after season, in many places, it begins to overwrite the older variations. Not by force, but by familiarity. In a mass media age, what you see most often becomes what you always knew. There's a gentle irony here, but also a kindness. People want a figure who looks like he has enough to share. During a depression, abundance, even painted abundance, can feel like a promise that better days might return. A father, reading the paper by a dim bulb, glances at the image and thinks, I can't give them everything, but I can give them this moment. From this point on, Santa's face is less regional and more national. He can appear on a billboard, a magazine, a storefront, and still feel like the same visitor who tiptoes, laughs softly, and leaves before dawn. But history doesn't pause for sentiment. The decade turns, the world tightens, and soon Santa will be asked to travel with soldiers and sailors, packed into letters, songs, and parcels across oceans. The next winter will taste like uncertainty. A wartime factory in December sounds like relentless weather. Presses thump, belts rattle, steam hisses from pipes. The air tastes of hot metal and oil, and the windows are filmed with grime that daylight can't quite penetrate. On a locker door, someone has taped a small Santa cutout, grinning, almost stubbornly cheerful. In global conflict, nations lean on symbols that can carry tenderness without revealing weakness. Santa becomes one of those symbols. Not as a sermon, not as a command, but as a reminder of what people think they are protecting: kitchens, children, ordinary peace. A government organizer, exhausted over production targets, admits to himself, if morale sinks, everything sinks. He uses Santa because Santa is understood instantly. Across the sea, a serviceman opens a parcel that smells faintly of home: soap, cinnamon, paper warmed by hands. He pretends it's nothing, but his throat tightens. His inner conflict is almost embarrassing in its honesty. I'm supposed to be brave, he thinks, yet what I miss most is the quiet. After the war, the quiet becomes a national project. Suburbs spread. Highways stitch regions together. Factories that made weapons pivot to making appliances, radios, and toys. A new middle class learns to express care through purchases because purchases, for the first time, feel possible on a wide scale. Santa thrives in this landscape. He visits shopping centers. He appears in glossy catalogs. He becomes the friendly face on a season that is now planned months in advance. Yet he also becomes a measuring stick, and families feel the pressure. A mother watching her children circle items in a catalog thinks, I want them happy, but I don't want love to become a transaction. And then comes television, a new fireplace in the corner of the room. Santa steps into it easily, as if he had been waiting. The question is no longer whether he belongs to one church or one city. The question is whether he can survive being everywhere, all at once. In the next chapter, we'll watch Santa enter the age of broadcast and meet a moment when even the machinery of national defense finds itself answering a child's call. The glow of a 1950s television is a new kind of firelight. It washes a living room in soft gray blue, catching on tinsel and glass ornaments. Popcorn crackles in a bowl. Outside, the street is silent. Inside, a whole country watches the same seasonal stories within the same hour. Santa becomes a character you can debate without banishing. Films and radio dramas play with the question of belief, not to scold, but to cradle doubt and wonder together. In a Cold War culture trained to scan for threats, the holiday becomes a yearly rehearsal for safety. A father, pretending not to care, feels his own contradiction. I'm raising them to be sensible, he thinks, yet I can't bear the day they stop feeling this. Then, In 1955, a modern accident turns into modern folklore. A department store prints a number for children to call Santa. The number is wrong. Calls land at a military operations desk, CONAD, soon to become NORAD, where phones are meant for alerts, not wish lists. Picture it. Maps on the walls, coffee gone cold, cigarette smoke hovering under bright lights. An officer answers, expecting urgency, and hears a small voice ask, carefully, "Is this Santa?" His inner conflict lasts a heartbeat. If I shut this down, he thinks, I become the villain of a child's winter. So he plays along. The staff begins tracking Santa's flight, and the tradition persists year after year. It is both charming and revealing. Even the most serious systems can make room for a gentle story when people need it. By now, Santa is more than a figure. He is a shared appointment on the calendar. He can ride a parade float, appear between sitcoms, sit in a mall, and still feel like the same visitor from the poem. The story has become sturdy, but sturdiness invites travel. As American movies, music, and products circle the globe, Santa rides along, meeting other winter gift-bringers, other customs, other sacred days. The next chapter is a border crossing, and the negotiations are already underway. A late 20th century December city, anywhere from Paris to Seoul, has its own winter soundtrack. Traffic hiss on wet streets, shop doors chiming, speakers leaking carols into the cold. In a brightly lit store, plastic reindeer shine under fluorescent light, and the air smells of roasted nuts and new fabric. A Santa figure stands near the entrance, smiling for cameras in a language he doesn't need to speak. By this point, Santa has become wonderfully portable. He can arrive by sleigh in one country, by boat in another, by camel in a third, because what people truly import is not transportation, but the mood, generosity arriving in the darkest weeks. Local traditions don't always disappear, they often braid together. The Christ kind, Dead Moros, Befana, St. Nicholas. Each keeps a foothold where communities keep telling their own stories. Still, the arrival of the red-suited icon can raise questions. A teacher in a small town watches children copy an American Santa drawing and feels a pang. I want them connected to the world, she thinks, but I don't want our own songs to fade. A business owner, less sentimental but not heartless, feels a different pull. If the season brings visitors and income, he thinks, it can keep this place alive. This is the modern compromise, heritage and exchange, local meaning and global visibility. Sometimes the blend is playful, Santa wearing regional patterns, greeting people in local phrases. Sometimes it's tense, especially where religion worries that the season is drifting from its sacred core. Yet even there, families often keep what works. A ritual that gathers people indoors, that gives children a language for hope, that permits adults a brief softness. What's striking is how Santa adapts to whatever a society needs most. In hard economies, he becomes a symbol of relief. In anxious times, a symbol of reassurance. In prosperous times, a symbol of celebration. The figure is flexible because the winter need is steady. But a new kind of winter is coming. Digital, constant, personalized. The next migration will not be across oceans, but into inboxes and algorithms, where Santa knows starts to sound surprisingly literal. It's midnight in a modern kitchen. The house is quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and the soft tapping of a fingertip on a phone screen. A parent scrolls through a cart while a kettle cools on the stove, releasing a faint mineral smell into the air. Outside, delivery vans whisper down the street like late-night fairies. Somewhere else, a warehouse shines under highlights. Conveyors rattle. Scanners beep. Cardboard slides and thumps in a rhythm that feels almost like snowfall, if snow were scheduled. This is not the enemy of wonder. It is the machinery that tries, clumsily, to deliver wonder on time. A logistics manager watches the clock and thinks, if we miss these deadlines, we disappoint families. Then the other thought arrives, heavier. If we push too hard, we break people. The season has always carried pressure. The tools have simply changed. Children still make lists, but many do it digitally. Wish lists that can be shared, compared, edited. Parents still perform small acts of secrecy, but now they track parcels, hide browser tabs, and time deliveries like stage cues. The old line he knows is usually said with a smile, Yet in an age of data, it can also raise an eyebrow. A parent feels that modern contradiction. I want the magic, they think, but I don't want my child to feel watched. And still, the sensory core survives. Pine scent in a hallway. The brittle rip of wrapping paper in the morning. The hush right before everyone wakes. These moments don't belong to corporations or algorithms. They belong to households. Santa persists because he organizes a certain kind of tenderness, one that asks adults to plan, to give, to pretend for the sake of someone else's joy. Which brings us back to the oldest part of the story, secret generosity. If Santa is a modern construction, it is built from a very old human need. In our final chapter, we'll return to Nicholas's original impulse. Help without humiliation, and see why the icon still matters, even when we know exactly how the lights are wired. Let's end far from the mall and the warehouse, in the softer light of memory. In the old city of Myra, today's Demra on the Turkish coast, the air carries salt from the sea, and winter is mild enough that stone stays damp rather than icy. Ruins sit quiet under pale sun. In a church once dedicated to Nicholas, the cool interior smells of wax and old plaster, and footsteps sound careful, as if people don't want to wake the centuries. Nicholas, as history can cautiously suggest, was remembered for gifts given without applause, aid offered in ways that protected dignity. That detail is the thread that still pulls through all the later transformations. Because the hardest part of winter is often not cold, it's shame. The shame of not providing, not belonging, not measuring up to the season's bright expectations. You can see the old impulse in a modern scene. A community center on a December morning. Breath fogs in the doorway, volunteers' hands redden as they lift boxes of oranges and canned soup, and a child clutches a donated coat that smells faintly of someone else's laundry soap. A volunteer feels a quiet conflict. I want to help, she thinks, but I don't want anyone to feel small. A parent in line has the mirror version. I need this, he thinks, but I don't want my kids to learn embarrassment. This is where the modern Santa, for all his layers, still performs a kind of mercy. He provides a mask, an anonymous giver, so receiving can feel like wonder rather than charity. He gives adults permission to be secretly generous. He gives communities a seasonal language for softness. And yes, he also rides on commerce, because modern life rides on commerce. The two have grown together, tangled like evergreen branches. So the invention of Santa is not a debunking. It's a portrait of how societies build comfort. A saint becomes a story, the story becomes a shared appointment, the appointment becomes a tradition that can travel. And every year, in one quiet home after another, someone chooses to keep it gentle. Now, as you turn out the lights, notice how the myth still opens a door, not to perfection, but to the possibility of giving without being seen. And that door, once opened, tends to stay ajar.